Hello, everyone. This is a new lecture for Unit 4. In this unit, we're going to cover respiratory system and urinary system. So this week's lecture will be on respiratory system. Next week will be on urinary system. So today we're going to focus on the respiratory system anatomy part, and I like to have you read your textbook from page let me see, from page 818 to 834 first before you watch this video for lecture. Okay, so make sure you read first and then watch this video. Okay, so let me get my share screen out first. Hold on 1 second. Let me redo this. Did not do it right. Oops, where did it go? Hold on 1 second. Sorry, you guys. I need to find my slides first. Okay, I'm almost there. Bear with me. Here we go. All right, hopefully you can see my screen, huh? So this is the respiratory system. All right, so first part is, when you think about respiratory system, think about the function and the main structures. So you probably will think, okay, lungs, trachea, the airway, right? The functions, what are the main functions for respiratory system? In this part, let me use my whiteboard to explain that. Okay. Sorry, you guys. Let me just do something first here. Okay. Okay. Oops. Okay, here we go. That's the whiteboard I want to have. Okay, so we're talking about the respiratory system function of the respiratory system. So basically has three big parts. Number one is the air is coming in from outside into the lung, okay, and then get to the smallest structure in the lung. It's called the air sac or alveoli. So here, this structure, this is a functional unit of for the lung. It's only made by simple squamous epithelial cells. It's very, very thin. And then along these air sacs, there are millions of them, okay, along them, there are blood capillaries, okay. So these capillaries, if you remember the smallest blood vessels, they are the structure, the wall is made by simple squamous epithelial cells, and then inside is blood running, okay? And then in between the air sac and the blood capillaries, there are secretions from these squamous epithelial cells. There are water, proteins, minerals, okay, kind of like that. And then the gas exchange can take place between the air sac and the blood vessels. So it's right here. So gas can go from the air sac to the blood vessel or from capillaries back to the air sac. This exchange is simple diffusion. It's totally dependent on the concentration gradient. If in the air sac there are more oxygen than in the capillaries, then oxygen will diffuse into the blood capillaries. And same token, the CO2 in the blood capillaries are higher in concentration, so the CO2 will diffuse back into the air sac. So when we inhale, we bring more oxygen into the air sac. The oxygen can diffuse into the blood capillaries. At the same time, when we blow out the air, more CO2 will transport it from the capillaries back to the air sac and then outside. This part of gas exchange, we call it external respiration. Okay, external respiration is between the gas exchange between the air sac and blood capillaries. Okay, if we have external respiration, then we should have internal respiration as well, right? So if you think about internal respiration, it is between the blood capillaries and the tissue cells around these blood vessels. So this is again is the blood capillaries. Okay, let's say in anywhere in your body, let's say in your skin. So you have the skin cells around it. Okay, the skin cells around it, or it can be anywhere. Let's say it can be in your liver, right? Can be in your GI tract. So you have different types of cells around it, around these blood capillaries. Okay, so these cells, the metabolism will generate a lot of CO2 and also use a lot of oxygen to make ATP. So when blood is traveling in this area, the oxygen will first get out from blood capillary. Simple diffusion again. Oxygen will travel from higher concentrated area to the lower concentrated area. And then the oxygen will get into the tissue cells. And then in the cells, the oxygen will be used to make ATP. So the blood vessels will have more oxygen than the tissue cells. Okay. At the same time, metabolism of these tissue cells will generate a lot of CO2. So CO2 will be more concentrated in the cells than in the blood. So CO2 will diffuse from tissue cells into the blood capillaries. Okay, this part of gas exchange again is a gas exchange, but this time it is between the blood capillaries and the surrounding cells. This part of gas exchange is called internal respiration. Okay, and in between here, between the external and internal respiration, the blood will carry the gases, right? And transport gases from one location to another location. Okay, so this part is called no blood. Oh no, let me see, rewrite it. Gas transport. Okay, gas transport. So the external respiration is number one, and gas transport is number two, and the third part will be the internal respiration. So this is basically the three big parts for respiratory system. Okay, so we're going to focus on the three parts, right? And then today we're just going to focus on the anatomy part. Okay, let me see. All right, and then here. Okay, now we're back to this slide I had before. Okay, the respiratory system. So we kind of talk about the system in big parts, three parts, right? And then we're going to focus on the anatomy part. And so if you talk about external respiration, that is the gas exchange between outside and the blood capillaries. So first the air will come in all the way from your nose and the trachea and different tubular structure, and then finally get to the air sac. So this part, there's no gas exchange. This is only the way for gas to come in and out. So kind of like what we call airway, right? So this part, the anatomical term is called a conducting zone. The air come in or out. Okay, so the conducting zone, there's no gas exchange. It's only for air to travel from outside into the air sac. Okay, so in this part, okay, the parts for conducting zone you do need to know. Right? If you read your book, you probably already know. Okay, the parts should be nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and terminal bronchioles. Those are the parts for conducting zone, just for air in and out. Maybe I should write it out. Okay, let me try to write it. Let me write it out. So, okay, so we're talking about conducting zone. All right, so start with the nose, and then pharynx, and then larynx, and then trachea, and then bronchus or bronchi for plural, and then bronchioles. And then the next part is called terminal bronchioles. Okay, that's the parts for conducting zone, okay, structures. The pharynx is what we call the throat, okay? So under the pharynx, there are three parts. One, the superior part is the nasal pharynx, and then it's the oral pharynx, and the third part or the inferior part is called laryngeal pharynx. Okay, so you can study these structures from the pictures in your book and then from the models on MyLab and Mastering. Okay, larynx is what we call the voice box. Okay, and then trachea, bronchus. All right, so this part should be easy. And then the next part is let's see, the next part. Oh, okay. Maybe I should say something about the muscles. Okay, laryngeal pharynx. That's the throat, right? This part, we have the muscles is called the superior, middle, and the inferior constrictor muscles. They are controlled by glossopharyngeal nerve. Do you remember this nerve? Glossopharyngeal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 9, and vagus nerve. So cranial nerve number 9 and 10 are both used to control the constrictor muscles around the throat. These 3 constrictor muscles, you can find the pictures in your book under the muscle chapter. Okay, you can find the superior, middle, and inferior constrictor muscles. Okay, and then if we look at the larynx, now we're focused on this larynx part. Okay, so let me go back to our slide. Okay, here we go. All right, so if we go back to this slide, okay. Did I go to too much? Okay, so let's review this before we continue. So first we talked about the conducting zone. We talked about that, the different structures just for air to pass, okay? And then the other zone is called the respiratory zone. We're going to talk about that later. That zone is for gas exchange, okay? So we're still talking about the conducting zone. Right here in this picture, it shows more details. So if you look here, is a trachea right here, trachea. Okay, the key characteristic for trachea is trachea has these cartilage rings. All right, the hyaline cartilage rings, you know, in C shape. Most of them are in the C shape. Okay, so it's a solid on the anterior part, but it's not a complete circle. So in the posterior part, there's a gap between the cartilage rings. So that's a trachea. And then trachea will divide into 2 big tubular structure. This is called bronchus for one, bronchus. So you can see in the bronchus here, the cartilage ring, the shape start to change. Okay, it's not a very typical C shape anymore. All right, so it becomes more and more irregular. Okay, and then from the bronchus, it's going to divide to different levels of bronchi. All right, smaller and smaller and smaller. It is, but it's still, they are still bronchi, different levels. And then from the bronchi here, see tertiary bronchi, it's going to develop into the bronchioles right here, bronchioles. It is still part of the conducting zone. So if you compare the bronchioles to the bronchi, can you see the structural difference between this part and the bronchi part, the bronchioles do not have any cartilage anymore. Okay, so from trachea to big bronchi and then to different levels of bronchi, the cartilage shape starts to change from C shape to irregular and to the plates like little pieces. And then once these tubular structures divide to form bronchioles, there's no more cartilages. Okay, so the end of the conducting zone is this structure. It's called a terminal bronchiole. Okay, so up to this point, air just come in and out. There's no gas exchange. All right, so now if you look, the structure, we continue from the conducting zone down to, from the terminal bronchioles and divide. And now this part of structure is called a respiratory zone because in this area, gas exchange can take place. Okay, so we start from this part is a terminal bronchiole. If you remember, this is the end of the conducting zone. All right, and from the terminal bronchiole, it developed into respiratory bronchioles. So if you compare the respiratory bronchioles to the terminal bronchiole, do you see the difference? The respiratory bronchioles have this little air sacs attached to it. Okay, these air sacs also called alveoli, same thing. Okay, so this terminal bronchiole does not have air sacs attached to it. But once you see the air sacs attached to this tubular structure, then this part is called the respiratory bronchioles. Gas exchange can take place. All right, and then this respiratory bronchioles will continue to divide, and now you see more and more alveoli attached to it. Okay, so if you have a lot of alveoli attached to this tubular structure, then this tubular structure is called alveolar duct. One alveolar duct will have many alveoli attached to it. Okay. So for the function of the nose, you can read from your book. I'm not going to talk about this. This should be easy part for you. The structure of the nose, the function of the nose. Please use your lab handout as your guide, and you should be able to recognize all these structures. Okay, the structure terms you should know. Okay, this slide is kind of a review slide from your 430 and give you the bony structures involved in forming the nasal cavity. Okay, so in terms of the epithelial lining, okay, there are two types of lining. Olfactory mucosa, which lines in the nasal cavity, so you have the smell receptors embedded in, and the rest of the conducting zone are lined with respiratory epithelium. So this structure gave you most of the anatomical terms in the conducting zone, right? And so we know this is a nasal cavity. This is the pharynx, that's the throat. And then this is the larynx over here. That's the voice box here. And then the trachea down here. So if you see on the posterior side of the trachea, here is the esophagus. That's where the food is coming down, right? So because you want the food to come down in a smooth way, right? You don't want to have bumps once when you swallow food. So that this is one of the advantage we have in the trachea. The cartilage is like a C-shaped ring. And on the posterior side here, there's no cartilage at all. So this part is soft. Okay, so the food can go down smoothly instead of like a bumping road down. And also, when you swallow a big, we have a big swallow food down here. If this is a big structure, and this one can actually help to push, compress the trachea, so allow more space for the food to go down, right? So if you do have a cartilage over here, then you cannot do that because this part is soft. Then it will allow the food actually compress this soft trachea tissue, so it can get downward easier. All right, so if you look at this part of structure, this is called oral pharynx. This part of the throat is shared by both the airway and the food pathway. Okay, this part. And if you remember, we talked about palatine tonsil before. So this is the tonsil. When you open your mouth, you can see, right, at the back of your tongue. And then this part is the lingual tonsil we talk about at the base of the tongue, all right? And I didn't mention there's another type of tonsil. It's called pharyngeal tonsil right here, you see? Pharyngeal tonsil is in the pharynx. And this pharyngeal tonsil, we only have one, okay? Palatine tonsil and the lingual tonsils, they're paired, but the pharyngeal tonsil, only one. So the function of tonsils are to catch or detect any abnormal particles coming into your system. So when you inhale air, if there's any bacteria, pollen, or any particles which may trigger your immune responses, can be detected by this tonsil structure. Right? Okay, so this one is showing you if you can label this structure with the different parts of the pharynx and think about the functions. Okay, so I was talking about the sphincter muscles, so I do have this slide here. So superior, middle, inferior pharyngeal constrictor muscles. All right, these muscles are controlled by what nerves, everyone? Glossopharyngeal and vagus. And vagus. Oh, it is listed here. Okay, good. All right, now we get to the voice box. All right, voice box also called larynx. All right, so this definitely is an airway. That's how you produce your voice. Okay, where is that? Right here, right here. Okay, this is the voice box part or larynx. All right, so if you look at the larynx structure, there are multiple cartilage tissue, cartilages around this structure to support and to help to make the sound. All right, the cartilages we have here, okay, this one is the only one, but very big, is called a thyroid cartilage. So if you put your finger on the in front of this larynx part and you swallow, you can feel there's a bump going up and down. That is this part, okay, thyroid cartilage, only one. Okay, so this is anterior view, this is a sagittal view. So if you look at this sagittal view here, this is a thyroid cartilage, okay. Next one is called a cricoid cartilage right here, cricoid cartilage, only one. It's on the inferior side of thyroid cartilage. If you look at this cartilage, oops, going too fast. Let me go back. If you look at this cartilage, this is anterior side, this is a posterior side. So anterior side is narrow, posterior side is much bigger. Okay, so if someone gets a food gets stuck in the larynx, choking, and so can grasp for air, what can you do? You can easily find this a soft spot. You can touch yourself and see if you can find this spot. Okay, there's a soft spot between the thyroid and the cricoid cartilage. Okay, so this spot is where you can actually use a sharp instrument, sharp tool to poke a hole right here. So the air, instead of going up this way, the air can go in and out this way. Okay, so you can help maybe save someone's life. And for us, if we want to use this spot because it's easy to find this spot. And also, if you go in here from this spot, okay, on the posterior side, you do have very wide cricoid cartilage. So let's say if you push too hard, okay, the sharp tool may touch this cartilage, but it will not penetrate this thick structure and get to your esophagus. You definitely do not want to poke a hole on your esophagus. That will cause bleeding, and you may bleed to death, right? So for us, this is the spot we can choose. But if you do it in the hospital, the doctors can stabilize the patient, and then they like to do it from the trachea, this part, okay? Because it's further away from the air voice box, and you make sure that the air can go in and out easily this way. And also the doctors, they're professionals, so they will not push too hard, so no worry to damage the esophagus, even though on the trachea, remember on this side there's no cartilage at all. Okay, so that's the second cartilage we have. Okay, and then let's see, we had a thyroid cartilage, we had a cricoid, and let's see what else we have. This one, all right, on the lateral side, we have something called a arytenoid cartilage. There are one on each side, arytenoid cartilage, okay? And then on the tip of the arytenoid cartilage, there's another cartilage. It's called a corniculate cartilage on the top of this arytenoid cartilage. I'll give you a function in a minute. And then on the lateral side, this arytenoid is more on the posterior lateral. And then on the lateral of this arytenoid cartilage, there's another one. It's called cuneiform cartilage. It's embedded in the connective tissue. This one is just for support of surrounding tissue here. Okay, so the last cartilage here we have is called epiglottis. You probably heard about epiglottis. Every time you swallow, epiglottis should close the airway here, close the voice box so the food can go down to the esophagus. But if you try to talk, then the epiglottis has to open so the air can get out from the voice box and then to make a sound. So if you try to swallow and talk at the same time, then you confuse the epiglottis. It cannot close properly. Then you may get food get stuck in the voice box. Okay, this is a review picture for cartilages around voice box. So here, this anterior view, posterior view, and lateral view. Okay, what is this one? Thyroid cartilage. This one, cricoid cartilage. Okay, on the posterior side, two arytenoid cartilages. On the tip is called, what is this little one here? Corniculate cartilage. And then on the lateral side, support the structure embedded in the connective tissue is called a corniform cartilages. Okay, a pair. So these cartilages definitely is the muscle attachment sites. So here I'm giving you 4 important muscles you need to know. Okay, so again, this one is lateral view, this one is a posterior view. Okay, so here are these muscles here. Let's see from the anterior side here. This is a cricoid cartilage right here, right? So here, these muscles right here, okay, it's connecting cricoid and thyroid cartilages. So it is called cricothyroid muscle. Easy, huh? Okay. On the posterior side right here, okay, this cartilage is cricoid cartilage. Okay, so this muscle connects cricoid cartilage from the posterior side to the arytenoid cartilage. So this one is called posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. And then this one is between two arytenoid cartilages. Okay, it's in the transverse version, so it's called transverse arytenoid. Okay, and then this one is easy then. This one is like a cross, right? So definitely it's a oblique muscle, so it's called oblique arytenoid. Okay, so those are the muscles. So one more time, this one is posterior cricoarytenoid muscle, transverse arytenoid muscle, oblique arytenoid muscle, and this part is the posterior side of trachea. See this cartilage here? There's a gap in between, right? Okay. All right, so from the anterior side, okay, these two muscles are both called cricothyroid muscle because they connect these two cartilages. All right, that's all you need to know, cricothyroid muscle. All right, so these muscles, of course, they are controlled by nerves. All right, nerves controlling this is the branches from vagus nerve. Okay, let's do this. This one, you need to pay attention to this one. From vagus nerve, it's coming down from cranial nerve, from the brain, all right, and come down to the larynx part, and then gave a branch. It's called a superior laryngeal nerve. One branch from vagus nerve going to the larynx part is called a superior laryngeal nerve. This superior laryngeal nerve is going to divide into internal and external laryngeal nerve. So if you look at the internal laryngeal nerve right here and external laryngeal nerve right here, okay, internal laryngeal nerve is a sensory nerve, okay, on this superior part of the vocal cords. External laryngeal nerve is a motor nerve which controls this muscle. Now you already know this muscle is called a cricothyroid muscle. Okay, all right, and then there's another branch from vagus nerve. another branch from vagus. I think my next slide is better for this one. This one is called recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, and this nerve, recurrent laryngeal nerve, is a mixed nerve, so it has a sensory input for the lower part of the vocal cord, and also the motor function for the other three muscles we talked about. Okay, on this picture, the recurrent nerve is here. Okay, let me show you from the other slide. Okay. Okay, so let's use this one for review. This part is called superior laryngeal nerve, giving two branches, internal, external laryngeal nerve. Internal branch is a sensory nerve. External branch is a motor nerve, only controls one muscle, the cricothyroid muscle. The recurrent nerve is another branch from the vagus nerve. Okay, so here we go. This one, if you look, this one is a recurrent nerve on the right side. On the right side. Okay, so this recurrent nerve, you see, it make a U-turn. It make U-turn and go up. It is a mixed nerve, all right? It have sensory inputs and also controls three of the laryngeal muscles we talked about. Okay, so if you look at this recurrent nerve over here, okay, and then you look at this one, all right? So if you think about this is a vagus nerve, keep going down, and then there's a branch, make a U-turn and go up, that is a recurrent nerve. So if you look at the right side and the left side of a recurrent nerve, it's a little bit different, okay? On the right side, this recurrent nerve kind of branch out earlier, okay? And just go to the voice box. But on the left side, this recurrent nerve goes around this structure. What is this structure? Aortic arch. Yes? So this left side of the recurrent laryngeal nerve goes around aortic arch and then go to the voice box. So this has a functional importance here, because this nerve is right by this aortic arch. If you have a aortic aneurysm, okay, that means this aorta structure, the wall is damaged. There are weaker and thinner part on this aortic arch. So every time the blood get to the aortic arch, it can form a balloon, kind of push, bubble this wall structure. If that happens, it's going to stretch this left side recurrent nerve. Then this stretch is going to affect the function of the voice box. Remember, there are muscles controlled by this nerve. So you may lose your voice or change your voice. Okay, so if that happens a lot, that could be a sign that you may have aortic aneurysm. Okay, so we can use that to help to diagnose this very dangerous problem. Okay, now we'll get to the vocal cord. Okay, so this is a superior view. Okay, so this part is called the vocal cord. Okay, connective tissue, dense connective tissue. So by tightening of this vocal cord, and also by control this opening between that, this part has a name. It's called a glottis. By control the opening, the size of the widening of this opening, and also the how tight this vocal cord is, we can produce different sound, different sounds. Okay, so the vocal cord, there are two parts. Okay, right around this glottis is called the true vocal cord, and then on the side, this fold here on the side, lateral side, is called the false vocal cord. Okay, so this part I'm going to ask you to use your book picture to review the structures, all right? And then you should be able to label these structures from a picture, All right, so when you produce a voice, all right, there's a pitch and a loudness. Remember I said is determined by how wide the glottis open and also the tension of the vocal cord. Okay, so you can make different sound. So now I want you to actually try this by yourself. Let's say the question is, when you talk, are you when you make this when you try to say something, is that when you inhale or is that when you exhale? Try that. Try to talk when you inhale air. It's hard. You probably still can make some noise, but it's hard to make out words, clear words, right? So actually, when you try to talk or sing, it's actually the air is coming out when you exhale, okay? So the singers, they can control the air very well. So how much air and how fast the air coming through the vocal cord, so they can have beautiful songs. Okay, so let's see this part. Yeah, you can read this part by yourself. It's a function of the larynx. Okay, now let's talk about the trachea. Okay, trachea, the lining is mucous membrane or respiratory membrane. Okay, mucous membrane. And the wall of trachea has three parts. Mucosal part, that's the lining, submucosa, adventitia, that is the covering on the surface. Okay, so if we look at this structure here, is a cross section. All right, from here you can see this is outside, definitely adventitia, and this blue part is the cartilage C-type, C-shaped ring, and the yellow part is the submucosa, and the red part is the mucosa lining. And this is the posterior part. It is the esophagus, and between the C-shaped ring here, right here, no cartilage, only a muscle here. This muscle is called the trachealis muscle. Trachealis muscle. So this little structure right here is the extension from this mucosal lining and differentiated to make glands, because these glands are in the submucosa right here. So it is called a submucosal gland, also called the seromucosal glands. Okay, all right. So let's take a look. If we enlarge this box right here, enlarge this box, so you should have a mucosa, submucosa, and a cartilage tissue. Okay, so this is a mucosa right here, all the way from here to here. What kind of epithelial cells are these? Pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar cells. Good. And you have long cilia here facing the lumen. And then, of course, here's the basement membrane. That is another sign, another key characteristic for pseudostratified lining. And then this part will be the submucosa part, okay? So if we look at this histology, here is the lining pseudostratified ciliated columnar cells, all right, and submucosa right here, all the submucosa. And in the submucosa, you can see the tubular structure cross-lining. See, like this cuboidal looking cells is kind of like a duct structure, typical duct structure. And also you see this kind of structure right here, okay? So you have the cells here, okay, in clusters, okay? Not so typical as the tubular like this, all right? These are the glands, all right? Glandular structure, glands. Okay, so this part is the submucosal gland structure. All right, so here it says the conducting zone, right? Conducting zone. And the trachea right here divide into the bronchi. This dividing point is called a carina. It's just the structure you need to know, okay? And the bronchi, there are different levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. So from big to small, but still they're all bronchi because all of these structures have cartilage structures on the wall. Okay, so respiratory, we talked about this earlier, so let's review. We call this part the terminal bronchial because there's no alveoli attached to it. So this is still part of a conducting zone. Once you see the alveoli, they become the respiratory zone. Okay. So if you look at the lungs, on the right side and the left side, there's a difference. On the right side, there are 3 pieces. On the left side, only 2 pieces. So this structure, I have them listed on the lab handout. You do need to know. Okay. Okay. Histology picture for respiratory zone right here. Okay. So here, this is called a respiratory bronchial. Because this wall here, okay, you can see a little bit alveoli attached to it, okay? But if you compare this part of the duct system to this part, okay, you see this lining here seems thinner. This part is darker, okay, but this part is thinner because this lining cells of the duct changes, okay? So from the trachea, it is pseudo-stratified lining, and then get to the bronchi, it's more like a simple columnar lining, and get to the bronchial is more like a simple cuboidal lining, like here. Okay, once you get to the alveolar duct, it's all simple squamous epithelial lining. So if you look at this lining, it's going from thick to thin that way, but there's no clear cut. You know, exactly, we cannot say exactly at what point this transition takes place. It's just gradually the lining changes. And all these little space here, they are the cross sections of air sac or alveoli, right here. Alveoli, right here, alveoli. So what is the alveoli sac? Is alveoli sac. Do I have a okay, it's pretty much right here. So if you look at this structure right here, at the end is kind of like a grapes over here. A lot of alveoli attached to a common area. Okay, this is the alveolar duct, but this whole structure right here is called alveolar sac. Okay, so this part of a tubular structure, alveolar duct, connected to multiple alveoli. Okay, that's called alveolar sac. All right. So if I gave you structure like histology structure like this, you may want to study this from your book and also online histology pictures. Like this structure is more like a trachea or early part of bronchus because we can see the cartilage right here is so big, right? Okay. And definitely these structures are alveoli. Okay, so if you look at this structure right here, okay, if you look at this tubular structure, if you continue from here to here, we know at this part, it got to be the alveolar duct connected to multiple alveoli, okay? And then on this part, you see this lining is continuous. You don't see any alveoli attached to it. So this part probably is the terminal bronchial. Okay. And then from here to here, this transition right here, okay, is the respiratory bronchial. And then connected to the alveolar duct. So you probably would say, oh, I don't really see a lot of difference from here to here. But if you take a closer look, you can see the lining is a little bit thicker than this part. And also by location, this area, it is between the alveolar duct and the terminal bronchial. So it has to be the respiratory bronchial. Okay, so if I gave you a histology picture over here, you should be able to recognize these structures. Okay, please use the histology pictures online to study this. Okay, that's another one, more enlarged respiratory zone structure. Okay, all right. So when we talk about the respiratory zone, we're talking about the structure in this box right here. Okay, if we enlarge this box, we can see here like this. Okay, so here you can see on this respiratory bronchial, there are smooth muscle cells around it, and which can change the diameter of this tubular structure to control how much air to come in and out, right? And also we see this alveoli here and blood capillaries for gas exchange, right? And also these kind of like a purplish lines representing the elastic fibers. Do I have a label? Right? Oh, here. Okay. Elastic fibers. So there are a lot of elastic fibers around the alveoli. Elastic fibers are good for recoiling, if you remember that. So when you inhale, you expand the lung, inflate the air sacs. And when you exhale, the elastic fiber will help to recoil. Elastic fibers recoil to help to push air out. Okay, so elastic fibers are very important in the lung structure. Okay, so here, yeah, is a better view here. So smooth muscle cells around the tubular structure control the size of the diameter, and also this alveoli around it, we have elastic fibers. The recoiling of these fibers will help to push air out. And also we have these blood capillaries, a lot of blood capillaries on the air sac. Okay. Also, there are some cartilage fibers, but not as much as the elastic fibers. Okay. So if you remember this structure, okay, the two-layer serous membrane to make the pleura. Do you remember the pleura? Okay, so parietal pleura is outside, visceral pleura is inside. In between is the pleural cavity, which has the watery secretion to make the surface slippery. All right, so every time you move around, these two layers can slide from each other smoothly, which will not cause problem. But if you are a chronic smoker, long-term smoker, you're going to damage this simple squamous epithelial lining on the inner face of the pleura, or the inner face of the pleura, and then these cells cannot secrete as much fluid as normal, and then you're going to have a dry membrane kind of. And every time, if you have two dry membrane move from each other, it will cause inflammation and it will cause problems. Okay. So if we look at the details, in terms of the functional structure here, this is the air sac or alveolus right here. Okay, most of cells are simple squamous epithelial cells lining, but also there are another type of cells right here, septal cell, also called the type 2 cells right here. So these type 2 cells, right here, this type 2 cells can secrete surfactant. Surfactant is a lipoprotein, okay? It's a protein has a lipid portion on it. When you have a surfactant, it's kind of like put in like oil on the surface of this air sac. What it does is, because if it's lipid surface, there's no charge, okay? No negative or positive charges on the surface. So if there's no charge, and then that will reduce the tension or attraction from one side to another side, comparing to, let's say, if you have an air sac, there's no surfactant. You just have like a little bit of water on the surface. If you remember, water is a polar molecule. Okay, so water and water molecules, their tension in between. So they try to attract from each other, and then it will help to close this alveoli. But once you have surfactant on the surface, it's going to reduce that tension, so you can kind of keep this alveoli or prevent this alveoli from completely close up, right? So another word we want to say is, even when you exhale air out, all right, you want to push air out from each alveolus, but you do not want to completely close alveoli. If you do that, then it will be much harder if you try to inhale air to inflate these air sacs, because they're completely closed. You need to have a lot more energy, try to push to reopen them. So surfactant is very, very important, all right? So it's make a coat on the surface to reduce tension. Interesting thing here, if you think about a newborn, right? We say the first cry is so important because the first cry is the sign that the lungs start to work. When baby try to cry, they're going to inhale a huge amount of air. So that is a huge force to help to inflate all the alveoli. And then the surfactant will make the coat on the surface. And then from that point on, these alveoli will not close completely every time the baby exhale air. Okay. So this is the type 1 cell, is a simple squamous epithelial cells. Type 2 cells, also called the septal cells, they secrete surfactant. And in this structure, we can see other cells like this one, okay, macrophages, okay. So that is you already know, is a function involved in immune system, try to detect any abnormal particles in the areas because it is antigen presenting cell, right? Okay, so now this is the one alveolus, and then this part is the blood capillary cross section. You know, it's a cross section, so you can see this a simple squamous lining of this epithelial of this blood capillary, and inside is blood. Okay, so if we enlarge this part, okay, so on this side is the blood capillary. Okay, you have the red blood cells, white blood cells, and other stuff. And this the capillary wall is made by simple squamous epithelial cell right here. This is a nucleus of the simple squamous epithelial cell. On this side, is the simple squamous epithelial cells from the air sac, right? From the air sac, simple squamous epithelial cells. And in between is the secretions from both of these epithelial cells. All right, so it's called basal lamina or basement membrane. All right, so now think about the air, or let's say oxygen travels from blood capillary to the oxygen traveling from the air sac to the blood capillary, it has to cross these three layers. Okay, first is the simple squamous cell wall from the air sac, then is the basement membrane, then is a simple squamous epithelial cell from the capillary lining. So diffusion from air sac to the blood has to cross these three structures. So we gave a name for this structure. For this structure, the gas has to cross. It's called a respiratory membrane. Respiratory membrane. So again, this is a bigger picture. You can see simple squamous epithelial cells, blood capillaries with RBCs and other cells inside. Okay, and here is type 2 cells, macrophage here. All right, and then if you enlarge this respiratory membrane, this is alveolar simple squamous epithelial cells. In between is basement membrane, and here on this side is the blood capillary simple squamous epithelial cells. So all these three layers together make up the respiratory membrane. Respiratory membrane, three parts. Okay. All right, so lungs, you know, anatomy part, you're on your own, okay, should be straightforward, okay, to recognize left and right lungs. And blood supply to the lungs. Remember we said the blood capillary, lung capillary beds in the lung, they're just for gas exchange. And if you talk about the, like say, trachea, bronchi, or bronchial cells, how can they get blood supply to keep them healthy? Then you have to have a blood supply to these areas. So of course, it is going to use pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins. No. Okay, this one, pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins, and the pulmonary capillaries, we already know those are for gas exchange, right? Okay, and if we talk about the lung tissue blood supply, it goes from the external carotid thyrocervical trunks, bronchial arteries, and bronchial veins in that route. Okay, so it is part of a systemic circulation. Okay, because it's extensions or branches from external carotid artery. Okay, I mentioned it earlier. Pleura is made by serous membrane, so you have visceral and parietal pleura. In terms of breathing, there is a term, it's called ventilation. You probably heard about this word before. Ventilation is talking about air in or out through the conducting zone. Okay, air in or out through the conducting zone. That is called ventilation. Okay, let me see. Yeah, okay. Inspiration is going in, expiration is coming out. Yes. In terms of muscles involved in respiration, okay, there are two types of respiration. The first one is, when you are at the normal, no stimuli. So let's say if you just sit here, watch this video, normal breathing, inspiration, you inhale, you exhale. This is normal inspiration. But if you want to have more air in, you can actually control this to have a deep inhalation to have more air in. That will be called the forced inspiration. So if it's just the first one, the normal or quiet inspiration, okay, only two muscles are involved. The external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, okay? But if it's a forced inspiration, of course, more muscles are going to be involved. So if you take a look at these muscles, what are they do? Think about it. These muscles, they're going to lift your ribs more to increase the cavity, thoracic cavity. Once the cavity size increase, the pressure drops. Then you're going to have bigger pressure gradient between outside and your thoracic cavity, which will allow more air to come in. So if it's acquired inspiration, only two muscles, okay? So this process in a overview is the diaphragm contracts to go toward the abdominal cavity, and external intercostals contracts to lift the ribs. These two muscle contractions will make the thoracic cavity bigger. Once you have a bigger cavity, the pressure is lower. Then you're going to have a pressure difference between the atmosphere and the thoracic cavity. This pressure difference will allow the air move from a higher pressure point to the lower pressure point. So air will flow in. That's inspiration. Okay, so this part of the process, you do have it listed in your book. So you may want to read that part again. Okay, for expiration, if it's quiet expiration, no muscle contraction is actively involved in this process. It's just the relaxation of the diaphragm and also the external intercostal muscles will allow the air to come out. But if you push to have more air out, of course you can do that. In that case, you're going to have more muscles involved. So these are the muscles listed here. These muscles contract to make the thoracic cavity even smaller than normal, and that will help to push more air out. Okay, so now you should know, we're talking about air in and out is based on the pressure difference. So pressure difference is the key for air flow, right? Pressure difference allow the air flow from the high to the low point. Okay, so outside in the air, the pressure, it is called atmospheric pressure. Okay, and these terms you do need to know. This one, pulmonary pressure, that is the pressure within the alveoli. Intrapleural pressure is the pressure in the pleural cavity. Okay, so now think about this. Okay, intrapulmonary pressure, definitely this part has to be lower than atmospheric pressure, so the outside air can get into the alveoli, right? And then this one, intrapleural pressure, the pressure inside of the pleural cavity. This is actually very important. Okay, let me get to my whiteboard. Let me explain this. Okay, so let's say here's the lung, and then you have this pleura around it. Okay, so this pleura is made by simple squamous epithelial cells and alveolar, what I'm trying to say, the loose connective tissue, areolar connective tissue. So this is simple squamous epithelial cell. And then change the color. And here you have these dots representing the areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue function as a glue to glue different types of tissue together. Okay, so this areolar connective tissue and the simple squamous epithelial cells together, this together is called a serous membrane. Okay, so serous membrane around the lung is called the pleura. If it's around the heart, it's called pericardium, right? Okay, so here, where's the diaphragm? Diaphragm is right here. Okay, so basically, this part is attached to the diaphragm. Okay, and also this part is attached to the surrounding tissue. All right, so this parietal pleura cannot move. It's all attached to the surrounding part. Okay, and then inside of this pleural cavity, there are watery secretion. We did say the water are polar molecules. They have tension. They have charges on the surface. If you remember water here, on the oxygen side is partially negative. On the hydrogen side is partially positive. So if this is a water molecule, and then you have another water molecule over here, and this side has a partially positive, is going to attract it to this partially negative side. That is going to form some kind of attraction force. That's a hydrogen bond. Do you remember that? Okay, so there's a tension here. So if you have a watery secretion inside of this cavity, then these two membranous structure tend to get together because of this tension from water molecules. So this because this parietal pleura is fixed with the surrounding tissue. So only this visceral pleura can be attracted to this parietal pleura. This is a force help to prevent the alveoli completely closed. All right, so help to keep this lung um, inflated in a way. All right, so the lung can recoil back in certain degrees, but it will not go completely closed up because one is this pressure inside of this pleural cavity is very, very low because this water tension here, all right, attracts the visceral pleura to the parietal pleura. Another mechanism I told you earlier is because of a surfactant. Surfactant is going to line up this surface of alveoli, all right, so to reduce the surface tension, so that can help to prevent total collapse of the alveoli. All right, so let's say if there is a car accident, all right, you break your rib and the rib rupture this pleura. Do I have a, oh no, okay. I don't know where's the eraser. Sorry, maybe here. Is this eraser? Ooh, here. Okay. So, wow, I erased everything then. Oh, no. Okay, that's fine. So if you have a rupture of your pleura right here, and then the air will get in this way. All right. Normally, air comes in this way. It will not go to the pleural cavity, right? So the pleural cavity has a very, very kind of very close to the vacuum because of the tension, water tension, surface tension, right? So now, because you ruptured this pleura, air can come in here, air can come in here. So you think around your lung, is there any more pressure difference? It will not, all right? The pressure coming in here, the pressure coming in here is the same. So if there's no pressure difference, then the lung will not inflate. It will collapse. Make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, so in this case, the lung will collapse. That's very dangerous. But car accident to break the ribs is very common. Okay, so I think everybody, I keep telling all my students, you should have some simple things in your car in case of this type of situation. So what you should have is a like a square type of plastic sheet, any kind, like a thick one. And then you're going to have duct tape, some duct tape in your car. And if this kind of problem take place, what you can do is you're going to put this plastic sheet on this wound right here. And then you're going to use the duct tape tape around on your skin, 3 parts. Okay, so leave one side open, the inferior side. Then what you do is you use all your energy, try to inhale, big inhale. So when you inhale, like from here, forced inhalation, you're going to force this lung inflate and push all the air out from this opening. Push all the air out. Okay? Now you exhale. When you exhale, you're going to suck in this part to close this end. Then we'll block air to come in from this part, right? So the air is only going out from here. Okay, so this one will help you to maintain the pressure difference between the outside and inside of the lung. That will buy you some time to get to the hospital. You got it, everyone? Okay. Alrighty, let me see. Let me go back. I still need to figure out how to work on this one better. Okay, so this is why the intrapleural pressure is very important. Normally, this pressure is always negative, always smaller than the alveolar pressure. Okay, so consider this part is a vacuum effect. Why does it not work? Oh, here we go. Okay, so this diagram shows the pressure difference in different area. This one, see, is intrapulmonary pressure. What is that? It's the pressure in the alveoli, right? This is the intrapleural pressure. That is the pressure changes inside of the pleural cavity. Okay, so if you look at this scale here, the 0 means there's no difference between the alveolar pressure and outside air pressure. Okay, no difference. Okay, so below this 0 is the pressure is lower than outside, and then pressure is higher than outside. So of course, when the pressure is lower here than outside pressure, you're going to inhale, right? When the pressure is higher than outside, you exhale. Okay. Now, if you look at the pleural cavity pressure, it is always on the negative side. You see that? It's always lower. No matter it's going down or coming up, it's always lower than the alveolar pressure. It's a vacuum effect. Okay, so this vacuum effect will keep or will prevent the lung from total collapse. Okay, so talk about that. Okay, so let's see the forces, the pressure relationship. Okay, so we're talking about the two forces act to pull the lungs away from the thoracic wall, promoting lung collapse. What are they? One is the elastic fibers. Yeah? Okay. Maybe I'll come back to this one later. I don't want to confuse you with this one. Okay, so let me just repeat this one again. Okay, surfactant on the surface, inner surface of the alveoli, which will help to reduce the surface tension to prevent total collapse of the lung. Okay, and also negative pressure in the pleural cavity will increase the pressure tension, will increase the tension inside the pleural cavity to prevent total collapse of lung. All right, so now let's talk about the pulmonary ventilation. Do you remember what is pulmonary ventilation? It's just air in or air out, not including any of the gas exchange part, right? So it is the air moving in or out in the conducting zone. Okay, so this is the inspiration process, and I did give you an overview, and you can review this part from read your textbook, and it's better after reading you review this part to write down the process in your own words, inspiration and expiration. Okay. So airway resistance, well, if you have a mucus buildup, or if you reduce the size of the airway, then it can increase the resistance. So you have a harder or smaller volume of air in and out. Okay. Epinephrine, this one, or norepinephrine, they are used to used in the inhaler. Some of you may know already. The inhaler of this epinephrine will relax the smooth muscle cells around the bronchiole and the bronchi. Relax the smooth muscle cells will dilate the airway, which will reduce the resistance and allow more air to pass. So this is a common inhaler used for asthma patients. Okay, so I think I'm done with this lecture. Let's see if I go down to... All right, so this part of lecture is, I already posted this lecture slides under Unit 4 on Canvas. So you can print it out, and go over this. And I will send out an email and tell you after what you need to do after you listened to this lecture. Okay, and our next lecture will be next lecture will focus on the physiology part of respiratory system. Alrighty, I will see you next time.